They called him the Old Man, and at 72, Harry Wilson had grown used to it. What they didn't know was that this old man had once pulled 18 soldiers out of hell in the Iraqi desert, earning a silver star that now collected dust in a shoebox under his bed. But that was 34 years ago, and in the fluorescent-lit corridors of Midwest Energy Solutions, nobody cared about ancient history. The security office smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, a combination that had become as familiar to Harry as the weight of his service weapon once was. He sat behind the metal desk, watching the bank of monitors that showed every corner of the facility, the main entrance, the employee parking lot, the restricted areas where the real work happened. His weathered hands moved across the keyboard with surprising agility as he logged the night's reports. 3 minor incidents. A delivery truck at the wrong gate, a new employee who'd forgotten his badge, and a raccoon that had triggered the motion sensors near the backup generators. Routine. Predictable. Safe. Harry had been doing this job for 15 years, ever since he'd decided that corporate security was a good way to ease into retirement. The work wasn't challenging, but it was steady, and it let him feel useful without the life-or-death pressure he'd known in the Army. At Midwest Energy Solutions, the biggest crisis was usually someone smoking too close to the main building, or a contractor forgetting to sign in at the front desk. He was just finishing his report when the door to the security office opened, bringing with it the scent of expensive cologne and fresh ambition. "Harry, I'd like you to meet someone." Bill Henderson, the head of security, stood in the doorway with a young man who looked like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster. Tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled dark hair and a smile that probably worked wonders on job interviews. "This is Nick Evans. He's going to be joining our team." Harry stood, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, son." Nick's handshake was firm, confident, maybe a little too long. "Mr. Wilson, I've heard a lot about you. Bill says you've been here since the Stone Age." He laughed at his own joke, glancing at Bill for approval. 15 years, Harry said simply. "Long enough to know where all the bodies are buried." "Well, hopefully we won't need to worry about that much longer," Bill said, and something in his tone made Harry look at him more carefully. "Nick's going to be shadowing you for the next couple of weeks, learning the ropes. His father and Mr. Brennan go way back. They were fraternity brothers at Northwestern." Mr. Brennan, the facility director. Harry nodded slowly, understanding the subtext. This wasn't just a new hire. This was a connected new hire, the kind who came with guarantees and expectations. "I'm really looking forward to learning from you, Mr. Wilson," Nick said, but his eyes were already wandering to the monitors, taking inventory. "Though I have to say some of these systems look like they're from the Clinton administration. Don't you think it's time for an upgrade?" Harry felt the first stirring of something he'd been trying to ignore for months, the sense that the world was moving on without him. "They work fine," he said. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." Sure, Nick said, that smile never wavering. "I'm sure there's a lot I can learn from the traditional approach." After Bill left them alone, Harry began the orientation he'd given dozens of times before. He showed Nick the patrol routes, explained the access protocols, demonstrated how to work the radio system. Nick listened, nodded, asked intelligent questions, but Harry could see him checking his phone, glancing at his watch, radiating the barely contained energy of someone who was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "So this is it?" Nick asked as they completed their first patrol together. "Walk around, check doors, watch the cameras? Seems pretty straightforward." "Most of the time," Harry agreed. "But this isn't just any facility. We provide power to half the state. If something goes wrong here, it's not just our problem. It's everyone's problem." Nick nodded absently, but Harry could tell he wasn't really listening. To him, this was just a stepping stone, a box to check on his way to something bigger. Harry had seen that look before, in young lieutenants fresh out of West Point who thought they knew everything about combat before they'd heard their first shot fired in anger. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine and growing tension. Nick was competent enough, Harry had to admit. He picked up the procedures quickly, memorized the layouts, even made suggestions for improvements that weren't entirely stupid. But there was something about his attitude that grated against Harry like sand in a boot. "You know what your problem is, Mr. Wilson?" Nick said one afternoon as they sat in the security office. He'd been taking more liberties lately, speaking more freely, clearly comfortable that his position was secure. You're stuck in the past. All this talk about protocols and procedures. It's like you're still fighting the Cold War. Harry looked up from his paperwork. Is that right? Don't get me wrong, I respect what you guys did back in the day. But security isn't about paranoia anymore. It's about efficiency, technology, smart solutions. We've got cameras that can read license plates from a quarter mile away, motion sensors that can tell the difference between a person and a large dog. We don't need someone walking around with a flashlight anymore. And what happens when the technology fails? Nick laughed. Come on, Mr. Wilson. When's the last time the power went out here? This is 2023, not 1983. We've got redundancies on redundancies. The chances of a major system failure are basically zero. Harry didn't argue. There was no point. Nick would learn eventually, the way everyone learned, through experience. Harry just hoped that when that moment came, it wouldn't cost anyone their life. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as Harry was finishing his shift. Bill Henderson asked him to come to his office, and Harry knew from his tone that this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Sit down, Harry. Bill's office was small and cluttered, filled with industry magazines and safety reports. A framed picture of his family sat on his desk next to a coffee mug that proclaimed him world's greatest dad. He looked uncomfortable, the way men do when they have to deliver bad news they don't agree with. I'll cut right to the chase, Bill said. Mr. Brennan wants to make some changes to the security department. Streamline operations. Bring in some fresh blood. Harry nodded. He'd been expecting this conversation for weeks. Nick's done really well in his training period, exceeded all expectations, and with his background in cybersecurity, he brings a lot to the table that we need going forward. I'm sure he does. Bill shifted in his chair. The thing is, Harry, the department budget only covers 2 full-time security officers, and with your years of service, well, Mr. Brennan thought you might be ready for retirement. Might be ready. You've put in your time, Harry. 15 years of dedicated service. Hell, you're 72 years old. Most guys your age are playing golf and spoiling their grandchildren. Harry almost smiled at that. He didn't play golf, and he didn't have grandchildren. His wife, Margaret, had died 8 years ago from cancer, and they'd never had children. This job, this routine, these people, they were all he had left. When? He asked. End of the week, we'll have a little party. Cake in the break room, the whole thing. And of course, you'll get a full recommendation letter if you want to find something else. Something else. At 72, after 15 years of steady, reliable service, Harry wondered what that something else might be. Walmart greeter? Night watchman at a storage facility? Or maybe he could just sit at home and wait to die. I appreciate the notice, Harry said, standing up. I'll clean out my locker. Harry, I want you to know this isn't my decision. If it were up to me, I know, Bill, it's not personal, it's just business. But as Harry walked back to the security office, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was personal. Not for Bill, maybe, but for someone. Nick Evans had been working this angle from day one, and Harry had been too proud or too naive to see it coming. He found Nick at the desk, feet up, scrolling through his phone. The monitors showed their usual collection of empty corridors and parking lots. How'd the meeting go? Nick asked without looking up. Fine. Come on, Mr. Wilson. You don't have to pretend. Bill already told me about the transition plan. I know this is tough, but honestly, it's probably for the best. You'll finally get to enjoy your retirement, and I can start implementing some of the changes this place really needs. Harry began gathering his personal items from the desk drawers. A coffee mug Margaret had given him, a small American flag, a photo of his old unit from Desert Storm taken a few days before the ceasefire. 23 young faces full of pride and relief at having survived. How many of them were still alive? How many had jobs? How many had been pushed aside by ambitious young men who thought experience was just another word for obsolete? You know what I don't understand about your generation? Nick continued, still scrolling through his phone. You guys are so afraid of change. Everything has to be done the way it's always been done, like there's some sacred tradition involved. But this isn't the military, Mr. Wilson. This is the real world. Things evolve. Harry paused in his packing. Is that what you think this is? Tradition? Well, yeah. All that stuff about procedures and protocols and doing things the right way. It's like a religion with you old-timers. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Nick Evans, 29 years old, college-educated, well-connected, confident in the way that only comes from never having been tested, never having been responsible for anyone's life but his own, never having made a decision where failure meant people died. You're right, Harry said finally. It is like a religion. The only difference is, in my religion, faith isn't enough. You have to prove it every day. Nick laughed. Prove what? That you can walk around a building and check doors? Come on, Mr. Wilson, it's not exactly brain surgery. Harry finished packing his things into a cardboard box. 15 years of accumulated belongings fit easily into a container that had once held copy paper. It struck him as both pathetic and somehow appropriate. Good luck, Nick, he said. I hope you never have to find out what this job is really about. He was almost to the door when Nick spoke again. Hey, Mr. Wilson, for what it's worth, I do respect what you guys did over there. The whole Desert Storm thing, fighting for freedom and all that. It's just that the world's moved on, you know? We don't need soldiers anymore. We need smart people who can adapt. Harry stopped, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, he considered telling Nick about the Silver Star. About the night when his convoy had been ambushed outside Basra, when the radio had gone dead and the GPS had failed, and 18 kids had looked to him to get them home alive. About the decisions he'd made in the dark, with nothing but training and instinct, and the absolute knowledge that failure wasn't an option. But what would be the point? Nick wouldn't understand. How could he? He'd never been tested. Never been in a situation where smart people who could adapt weren't enough, where what you needed was someone who'd been there before and knew what to do when everything went wrong. You're right, Harry said. The world has moved on. He walked out of the security office for what he thought was the last time, carrying his box of memories and wondering what the hell he was supposed to do with the rest of his life. The phone call came 4 days later, just as Harry was trying to figure out whether the stale Cheerios in his kitchen cabinet were still edible. He'd been living off whatever was in the house since he'd left Midwest Energy, not really caring about food or much of anything else. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but official sounding. Mr. Wilson, this is Janet from HR at Midwest Energy Solutions. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been some confusion about your final paperwork. Could you come in sometime today to sort it out? Harry almost said no. He'd cleaned out his locker, turned in his badge and radio, signed all the forms Bill had put in front of him. What more could they want? But the truth was he had nothing else to do. At least it would get him out of the house. What time? He asked. Any time that's convenient for you. I'll be here until 5. Harry showered and put on one of his good shirts, the kind he used to wear to company meetings. It felt strange to dress up for what would probably be his final visit to the place that had defined his last 15 years. Strange and a little sad. The drive to Midwest Energy took 20 minutes through suburban streets lined with strip malls and chain restaurants. Harry had made this trip thousands of times, but today it felt different. Today he was a visitor, not an employee. An outsider looking in at a world that had already forgotten him. The facility sprawled across 40 acres of carefully maintained grounds, a complex of low buildings connected by covered walkways. The main administration building stood at the center, faced with red brick and glass that reflected the afternoon sun. Behind it, the real work happened. Massive transformers and switching stations that controlled the flow of electricity to hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses. Harry had walked these grounds so many times he could do it blindfolded. But today, the security guard at the main gate, someone he'd never seen before, made him sign in like any other visitor. "You'll need to wear this," the guard said, handing him a visitor's badge. "And you'll need an escort to get to HR."
An escort. As if 15 years of faithful service meant nothing. As if he might suddenly decide to sabotage the place or steal company secrets. Harry clipped the badge to his shirt and waited for someone to come collect him. The escort turned out to be Nick Evans, looking sharp in a new uniform that still showed the creases from the package. He walked with the confident stride of someone who'd already forgotten that he'd been on the job for less than a month. "Mr. Wilson, good to see you again. How's retirement treating you?" "Fine," Harry said.
They walked through corridors Harry could navigate in his sleep, past offices where people he'd known for years glanced up from their computers and offered polite smiles. A few waved. Most just looked uncomfortable, the way people do when confronted with evidence of their own mortality. "I have to say, things have been pretty quiet since you left," Nick said as they approached the HR department. "Knocked on wood, but I'm starting to think this job might be easier than you made it sound." Harry didn't respond. There was no point in explaining that security wasn't about the days when nothing happened. It was about the day when everything went wrong. Janet from HR turned out to be a middle-aged woman with graying hair and the harried look of someone who spent her days dealing with other people's problems. She had a thick folder on her desk, an apologetic expression that suggested she was about to make Harry's day a little worse. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming in. I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with your pension paperwork. It looks like some of the forms weren't filed properly, and we need to get them corrected before we can process your final payment." Harry sat down across from her desk and tried to summon the energy to care about pension paperwork. The truth was, he had enough savings to get by for a while, and Margaret's life insurance had paid off the house. He didn't need the money, but he supposed he might as well have it. "What do you need me to do?" "Just sign a few forms, verify some information. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes." But as Janet spread the paperwork across her desk, Harry could see this was going to take longer than a few minutes. There were forms for his service record, forms for his employment history, forms that seemed to serve no purpose except to justify Janet's job. He settled in for what he knew would be a bureaucratic marathon. He was halfway through signing his name for the 10th time when the lights went out. Not just dimmed or flickered, went completely dark, as if someone had thrown a switch that controlled the entire facility. The only illumination came from the emergency lighting system, casting everything in an eerie red glow that reminded Harry of being inside a submarine. Janet looked around in confusion. "That's odd. We never lose power here. This is a power company, for crying out loud." Through the office window, Harry could see people in the corridors, some looking confused, others already moving with the purposeful stride of people who had jobs to do during emergencies. In the distance, he could hear the building's PA system crackling to life. "Attention all personnel. We are experiencing a facility-wide power outage. Please remain calm and await further instructions." Harry was already on his feet, his body responding to years of training before his mind had fully processed what was happening. He moved to the window and looked out at the facility grounds, where he could see maintenance crews running toward the main power distribution center. "I should probably get back to the security office," Nick said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "This is probably just a blown transformer or something, right?" Harry didn't answer. He was listening to the sounds of the building, the absence of the usual electrical hum, the emergency generators kicking in, the growing volume of voices in the corridors, and underneath it all, something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. An alarm. Not the standard fire alarm or security alert, but something Harry had hoped never to hear in this building. The alarm that meant there was a problem with the facility's containment systems. "Janet," he said, turning back to the HR officer. "Where's the nearest emergency exit from here?" "What? Oh, right down the hall. Why?" "How long have you worked here?" 12 years, but I don't see." "Have you ever been through the emergency procedures? The real ones, not just the fire drill?" Janet looked confused. "Well, no, I mean, we've never had a real emergency before. Mr. Wilson, you're starting to scare me." Through the office door, Harry could see people moving more quickly now, some almost running. The PA system crackled again. All non-essential personnel report to designated evacuation areas immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Nick was standing by the door, radio in hand, trying to raise someone at the security office. "This is Evans, come in. Hello? Anyone there?" He looked at Harry. "I can't reach anyone. The radio's dead." Harry felt a familiar sensation, like a switch being thrown in his mind. It was the same feeling he'd had that night in Iraq when the convoy had come under fire and Lieutenant Morrison had frozen up, leaving Harry to take command of a situation that was spiraling out of control. The feeling of knowing that people were depending on him whether he wanted the responsibility or not. "Nick," he said, his voice taking on a tone of authority that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "How much do you know about this facility's emergency systems?" "What do you mean?" "The backup power, the containment protocols, the evacuation procedures. How much of that did Bill cover in your training?" Nick's face went pale. We mostly focused on the day-to-day stuff. He said the emergency procedures were all automated, that they were specialists who handled that kind of thing." Of course he did. Because Bill Henderson, for all his good intentions, had never been in the military, had never been in a situation where specialists were dead or missing and all you had left were the people who were still standing. Harry turned to Janet. "I need you to lock this office and stay here unless someone in a company uniform tells you specifically to move. Can you do that?" "Mr. Wilson, I don't understand what's happening." "Neither do I. But I know what's about to happen if we don't get these people out of here safely." He was already moving toward the door when Nick grabbed his arm. "Wait, where are you going? You don't work here anymore, remember? This isn't your responsibility." Harry looked at him, seeing not the cocky young man who'd taken his job, but a scared kid who was finally understanding that the world was more complicated than he'd thought. "You're right," Harry said. "It's not my responsibility. It's yours. You're the head of security now, so what are you going to do about it?" For a moment, Nick just stared at him. Then the radio crackled to life with a burst of static and a panicked voice. "Anyone out there, please respond. We've got people trapped in Building C. The emergency exits are locked down and we can't override them from here. We need someone who knows the manual release procedures." Nick looked at the radio, then at Harry. "I don't know the manual release procedures." "I do." It was that simple. 15 years of walking these corridors, of learning every system and backup system, of treating a routine job like it was the most important thing in the world because somewhere, deep down, Harry had known that someday it might be. "But you're not authorized," Nick said weakly. Harry almost laughed. "Son, when people are trapped in a burning building, nobody's going to ask to see my authorization." He was already in the corridor, moving toward the security office, when he heard Nick's footsteps behind him. "Wait up! I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. This is my mess now. The least I can do is try to help clean it up." They moved through corridors filled with confused employees and maintenance workers, all of them looking for someone to tell them what to do. Harry ignored the questions and kept moving, his mind already cataloging what needed to happen. Get to the security office, assess the scope of the problem, coordinate with the maintenance teams, and somehow get everyone out safely before whatever had caused the power failure turned into something worse. The security office was in chaos. 3 maintenance supervisors were crowded around the radio, trying to coordinate response teams, while 2 administrative assistants huddled by the monitors, which were showing nothing but static. Bill Henderson was there too, looking like a man who'd suddenly realized he was in over his head. "Harry?" Bill looked up as they entered.
"What are you doing here?"
"Trying to help. What's the situation?" "Hell if I know. We lost power about 10 minutes ago and now the backup systems are failing one by one. The emergency exits in Building C are locked down and we've got about 30 people trapped in there. The fire department's on the way, but they're not going to be able to get through those doors without heavy equipment." "What about the manual overrides?" Bill's face went blank. "The what?" "The manual overrides for the emergency exits. Every door in this place has a mechanical backup system in case the electronics fail. It's in the original building plans." "I don't know anything about that." Of course he didn't, because Bill had been hired 5 years ago when the facility was already established, and nobody had bothered to make sure he understood the systems that had been put in place by someone else. Just like nobody had bothered to make sure Nick understood them before they put him in charge of security. Harry moved to the filing cabinet in the corner of the office, the one where he'd kept the original blueprints and system manuals that everyone else had forgotten about. It was locked, but he'd hidden a spare key under the desk lamp years ago. A small violation of security protocol that he'd never reported, because he'd known that someday, someone might need those documents in a hurry. "Here," he said, spreading the blueprints across the desk. "Building C, emergency exit systems. Each door has a manual release mechanism accessed through a panel in the adjacent corridor. You need a special key to open the panel, but after that it's just a matter of turning a crank." Bill leaned over the plans. "How do you know all this?" "Because I read the manual. All of them. It's amazing what you can learn when you have 15 years and nothing better to do." One of the maintenance supervisors, a man named Pete Rodriguez, who Harry had known since his first week on the job, looked up from the radio. "Harry, thank God you're here. We've been trying to reach the emergency systems coordinator, but he's not answering his phone. Do you know how to access the main control panel?" "In the basement of Building A, but you need authorization codes to make any changes." "We've got the codes," Pete said. "What we don't have is someone who knows what the hell they mean." Harry looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. Bill Henderson, who'd never dealt with anything more serious than a fender bender in the parking lot. Nick Evans, who'd been so confident that technology made everything foolproof. Pete Rodriguez and the other maintenance guys, who knew their specific systems but had never been trained on emergency coordination, all of them looking to him for answers. And the funny thing was, he had them. Not because he was smarter or more qualified than anyone else, but because he'd spent 15 years preparing for a day that everyone had hoped would never come. "Okay," he said, falling back into the command voice he hadn't used in 3 decades. "Pete, take your team and get to Building C. I'll talk you through the manual override procedures over the radio. Bill, I need you to contact the emergency coordinator again, and if you can't reach him, start calling down the list until you find someone who can authorize a facility-wide evacuation." "What about me?" Nick asked. Harry looked at him, seeing something different in the young man's face. The cockiness was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect, or maybe just fear. "You're going to learn what this job is really about," Harry said. "Come on." They made their way through the facility toward Building A, past groups of employees who were beginning to understand that this wasn't a routine drill. The emergency lighting cast everything in stark shadows, and Harry could hear the distant sound of sirens as the first responders arrived outside. But he knew they wouldn't be able to do much until the people inside got the situation under control. The basement of Building A housed the main electrical distribution center, a maze of panels and switches and cables that controlled the flow of power throughout the facility. Harry had been down here dozens of times over the years, usually with maintenance crews who needed security clearance to access restricted areas. He'd never paid much attention to the technical details, but he'd absorbed enough to know which systems were critical and which were redundant. The main control panel was a wall-mounted console about the size of a restaurant menu, filled with switches and indicators and displays that were supposed to show the status of every electrical system in the facility. Right now, most of them were flashing red. "Jesus," Nick said, staring at the panel. "It looks like a Christmas tree from hell." Harry was studying the displays, trying to remember what Pete had told him about the facility's electrical systems. The main transformer was down, which explained the power outage, but the backup generators should have been able to handle the essential systems: lighting, communications, emergency exits. The fact that they weren't suggested something more serious than a simple equipment failure. "Nick, can you read that display over there? The one labeled Building Isolation?" Nick squinted at the panel. It says, "Manual Override Active." What does that mean? Harry felt his blood go cold. Manual override meant someone had deliberately shut down the backup systems. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. "Harry?" Nick's voice was tight with fear. "What does that mean?" Before Harry could answer, the radio crackled to life. "Security office, this is Rodriguez. We've got a problem in Building C. The manual override isn't working. The doors are still locked and we're starting to see smoke." Smoke. The one thing Harry had been hoping to avoid. In a facility filled with electrical equipment and chemical solvents, fire was everyone's worst nightmare. He grabbed the radio. "Pete, where's the smoke coming from?" "Looks like the main electrical panel on the first floor. It's not a big fire yet, but it's spreading." Harry closed his eyes, trying to visualize Building C's layout. The main electrical panel was on the opposite side of the building from the emergency exits, which meant the fire was between the trapped employees and their only way out. Even if they could get the doors open, the people inside might not be able to reach them. "Pete, can you get to the second floor from the outside?" "Not easily. We'd need a ladder truck, and that's still 20 minutes out." 20 minutes. Harry looked at the control panel again, trying to think of options. The building isolation system was designed to contain electrical fires by shutting down power to affected areas, but it also locked down all the safety systems. Whoever had activated it had known exactly what they were doing. "Nick," he said, "I need you to help me understand something. Who else has access to this control panel?" "I don't know. Bill might know, or maybe one of the maintenance supervisors." "No, I mean, who else has the authorization codes to activate the manual override?" Nick thought for a moment. "I guess anyone with level 5 security clearance. That's facility directors, department heads, senior maintenance staff, maybe a dozen people total. A dozen people who could have shut down the backup systems. A dozen people who knew the facility well enough to cause maximum damage with minimum effort." Harry was starting to form a theory about what was happening here, and he didn't like it. The radio crackled again. "Security office, we've got another problem. The fire suppression system in Building C isn't working. Repeat, fire suppression is not functioning." Harry grabbed the radio. "Pete, get your men away from that building, now." "But the people inside will die if you go in there and get trapped too. Get back to a safe distance and wait for my instructions." He turned to Nick, who was staring at the control panel with a look of growing understanding. "Someone did this on purpose," Nick said. "Someone wanted to trap those people in there." "Yeah, the question is who?" Harry was studying the control panel again when he noticed something he'd missed before. One of the displays showed a log of recent system changes, with timestamps and user identification codes. The manual override had been activated at 3:47 p.m., just 3 minutes before the main power failure. And the user ID belonged to someone Harry recognized. "Son of a bitch," he said softly. "What?" "The manual override was activated by maintenance supervisor David Chen. But Chen's been on vacation in Florida for the past week." Nick's face went pale. "You mean someone used his codes? Or Chen isn't really in Florida?" Harry's mind was racing now, putting together pieces of a puzzle he should have seen earlier. The timing of the power failure, just as he happened to be in the building for his final paperwork. The convenient malfunction of systems that should have been foolproof. The fact that someone with intimate knowledge of the facility's emergency procedures had been able to create this situation. "Harry?" Nick's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are we dealing with here?" Before Harry could answer, they heard footsteps on the stairs leading down to the basement. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that suggested someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Security office, this is Chen." The voice came over the radio, but it also echoed down the stairwell. "I'm in the building and I'm taking control of the emergency response." Harry and Nick looked at each other. David Chen, who was supposed to be in Florida. David Chen, whose security codes had been used to create this disaster. David Chen, who was now walking down the stairs toward them with God knew what intentions. "Nick," Harry said quietly, "how much do you trust me?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you willing to do exactly what I tell you, even if it doesn't make sense?" Nick looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good. Because we're about to find out whether 15 years of boring security work was worth anything." The footsteps were getting closer. Harry could see the beam of a flashlight dancing on the walls of the stairwell. In a few seconds, David Chen would be in the basement with them, and Harry would finally understand what this was all about. But first, He had to make sure Nick understood what they were up against. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Chen isn't here to help. He's here to make sure this situation goes from bad to worse. And the only thing standing between him and 30 innocent people is us." "But why would he want to hurt anyone? He's worked here for 8 years. "I don't know why, but I know how to stop him." The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Harry could see Chen's silhouette in the doorway, a compact, muscular man with close-cropped hair and the kind of controlled movements that suggested military training. In his hand was something that definitely wasn't standard security equipment. "Mr. Wilson?" Chen said, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "David, how was Florida?" Chen smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Humid, but educational. I learned a lot about industrial accidents and how they happen." "And you decided to apply that education here?" "This facility has been an accident waiting to happen for years. All it needed was someone with the knowledge and access to help it along." Harry could see Nick tensing beside him, probably getting ready to do something heroic and stupid. He put a restraining hand on the younger man's arm. "Mind if I ask why?" Harry said, trying to keep Chen talking while he figured out their options. "Midwest Energy Solutions has been cutting corners on safety for years, overriding inspection reports, ignoring maintenance recommendations, covering up violations that should have shut this place down. I've been finding reports for 3 years, and nobody wanted to listen." "So you decided to prove your point by murdering 30 people?" Chen's expression hardened. "Nobody has to die. All they have to do is evacuate the building and let it burn. A few $1 million in damage, some uncomfortable questions from the state regulatory board, and maybe next time they'll take safety seriously. Except you've trapped 30 people in Building C. That's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet." Harry felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same rage he'd felt in Iraq when Lieutenant Morrison had abandoned his post and left good soldiers to die. The anger of a man who'd spent his life trying to protect people, watching someone else throw lives away for the sake of making a point. "David," he said, "you've got about 30 seconds to tell me how to reverse the building isolation before I take that gun away from you and use it to redecorate this basement." Chen laughed. "With respect, Mr. Wilson, you're 72 years old, I'm 41, and I spent 8 years in the Rangers. I don't think you're in any position to make threats." "8 years in the Rangers? That's impressive. What was your unit?" 2nd Battalion, 75th Regiment. Saw action in Afghanistan and Iraq." "Iraq? What years?" 2003 to 2007. Harry nodded slowly. "So you would have been in the same theater as my unit. 3rd Armored Division, attached to the 1st Infantry for Operation Desert Storm." "Desert Storm was 1991. "That's right. I was a captain then. You would have been about 10 years old." Chen's expression was beginning to change, uncertainty creeping in around the edges of his confidence. "The thing about being a ranger," Harry continued, "is that you learn to think tactically. You assess threats, plan for contingencies, always have an exit strategy. It's good training." "Where are you going with this?" "I'm going with the fact that you made a tactical error. You assumed that because I'm old, I'm not dangerous, but you forgot to factor in experience." Harry's hand moved with a speed that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the heavy flashlight from the control panel and swung it in a short, vicious arc that caught Chen on the side of the head. The gun went flying, clattering across the concrete floor and sliding under a bank of electrical equipment. Chen staggered but didn't go down, his ranger training kicking in as he recovered his balance and moved into a fighting stance. He was younger, stronger, and better trained than Harry. But Harry had one advantage that Chen hadn't counted on. He was fighting for the lives of 30 innocent people, and that made him dangerous in ways that no amount of training could prepare someone for. The fight was brutal and brief. Chen came at him with the controlled aggression of someone who'd been taught to disable opponents quickly and efficiently. Harry fought like an old man with nothing left to lose, using every dirty trick he'd learned in 34 years since Desert Storm. Chen had better technique. Harry had better motivation. When it was over, Chen was unconscious on the floor, and Harry was leaning against the control panel, bleeding from a cut above his left eye and breathing hard. "Jesus Christ," Nick said, staring at him. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Not in security training," Harry said. He was already studying the control panel, looking for the switches that would reverse the building isolation. "Nick, I need you to radio Pete and tell him to be ready. As soon as I get these systems back online, he'll have about 5 minutes to get those people out before Chen's backup plan kicks in." "His what?" "Chen's too smart to put all his eggs in one basket. If I'm right, he's got something else rigged to go off when he doesn't check in." Harry found the master reset switch and threw it. Immediately, the red lights on the control panel began turning green as the backup systems came back online. He grabbed the radio. "Pete, this is Harry. The emergency exit should be unlocked now. Get those people out of Building C immediately." "Roger that. We're moving." Harry looked at his watch. 4:23 p.m. The power had been out for 36 minutes, which meant Chen had been planning this for a while, long enough to set up contingencies, backup plans, fail-safes to ensure that even if his primary sabotage was discovered, he could still achieve his goal of destroying the facility. "Nick, we need to get out of this basement now." "Why?" "Because Chen didn't come down here just to gloat. He came to make sure that when this place goes up, he's not in it." They were halfway up the stairs when the explosion rocked the building. Not the massive blast Harry had been expecting, but a series of smaller detonations from the direction of Building C. Harry grabbed the radio. "Pete, report." Static. Then, faintly, "We got them out, all 30. Building C is gone, but everyone's safe." Harry felt the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in an hour. 30 people were alive because he'd been able to remember 15 years' worth of boring security protocols when they mattered most. But as they reached the main floor, Harry could see that Chen's plan wasn't finished. Through the windows, he could see smoke rising from multiple buildings, and the sound of sirens was getting louder as more emergency vehicles arrived. Whatever Chen had really been after, destroying Building C was just the beginning.
"Harry!"
Bill Henderson appeared at the end of the corridor, moving fast. "Thank God you're here. We've got fires in 3 buildings. The main transformer is completely fried, and the hazmat team says there might be chemical contamination from the electrical fire." "Where's the incident, Commander?" "Still en route. We're flying blind here." Harry looked around at the chaos. Employees streaming out of buildings, firefighters setting up command posts, paramedics treating people for smoke inhalation. All of it happening without central coordination, without anyone who understood how the different parts of the facility fit together. "Bill," he said, "I need you to get on the PA system and order a complete evacuation. Everyone out, no exceptions." "I can't do that. Only Mr. Brennan can authorize a full evacuation, and he's in Chicago." "Then get him on the phone." "I've been trying." His assistant says he's in meetings all afternoon. Harry felt that familiar switch flipping in his mind again, the transition from follower to leader that had kept him alive in Iraq, and might keep these people alive today. "Bill, listen to me carefully. In about 10 minutes, this facility is going to become unsafe for anyone who doesn't have specialized training and protective equipment." Chen didn't just sabotage the electrical systems. He compromised the safety protocols for the chemical storage areas. If those fires spread to the wrong building, we're going to have a lot more than smoke to worry about. Bill's face went white. "How do you know all this?" "Because I spent 15 years learning about this place like my life depended on it. And today it does." Harry took the PA microphone from Bill's hands and switched it on. "Attention all personnel. This is Harry Wilson, former security supervisor. I'm ordering an immediate and complete evacuation of the facility. Everyone out, now. Do not stop to collect personal belongings. Do not wait for official authorization. If you are hearing this announcement, you have 5 minutes to get to the parking lot and away from the buildings." He handed the microphone back to Bill, who was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Harry, you don't have the authority to—" "I know. But I also know that in 5 minutes, nobody's going to care about authority. They're going to care about being alive."
The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency vehicles, evacuation procedures, and questions from officials who couldn't quite understand how a retired security guard had ended up coordinating the response to the worst industrial accident in the state's history. Harry answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and tried not to think about what would have happened if he hadn't been there. By 7 p.m., the immediate crisis was over.
The fires were contained, the chemical spill was minimal, and all employees had been accounted for. Chen was in custody, facing federal charges for domestic terrorism. The facility would be closed for months while investigators tried to piece together exactly what had happened and how much damage had been done. Harry was sitting in the parking lot holding an ice pack to his head and watching the last of the fire trucks pack up when Nick Evans found him. "Mr. Wilson, I wanted to thank you." Harry looked up at him. The cocky young man who'd taken his job was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he'd aged 10 years in one afternoon. "For what?" "For saving my ass. And for showing me what this job is really about." Harry almost smiled. "Don't take it too hard, son. You had no way of knowing something like this would happen. But you did. You were ready for it. I was ready for something. I didn't know what." Nick sat down on the curb beside him. "Mr. Wilson, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "That night in Iraq when you saved those 18 soldiers, was it anything like this?" Harry considered the question. "Not really. That was about combat, about keeping your head when people are shooting at you. This was about something else." "What?" "This was about remembering that the boring parts of any job are usually the most important parts. The procedures, the protocols, the stuff that seems pointless until the day it isn't." They sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the emergency vehicles leave. Finally, Nick spoke again. "Mr. Wilson, I heard they're going to need a new head of security, someone who really understands this place. Is that right? Bill recommended you for the position. So did Pete Rodriguez. Hell, so did I." Harry looked at him. "You recommended me for your job?" "It was never my job. I know that now. I was just keeping the chair warm until the right person came along." Harry thought about it. At 72, he could finally have the retirement he'd been planning. He could sell the house, move to Florida, spend his days playing shuffleboard and complaining about the weather. Or he could go back to a job he'd thought he was too old for, in a place where people finally understood what he brought to the table. "When do they need an answer?" "Tomorrow morning. But Mr. Wilson, I hope you'll say yes. Because if today taught me anything, it's that we need people who know the difference between doing a job and being responsible for it." That evening, Harry sat in his kitchen with a beer and the newspaper, reading about the incident at Midwest Energy Solutions. The article called it a narrow escape from disaster, crediting quick thinking by facility personnel for preventing what could have been a catastrophic industrial accident. His name was mentioned once in a paragraph about the coordination of the evacuation effort. The phone rang around 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. "Harry Wilson." "Yes." "Harry, this is Alex James. I think we need to talk." The voice was older, more polished than the one Harry remembered, but he recognized it immediately. Lieutenant Alex James, the young officer Harry had pulled out of that burning truck outside Basra 34 years ago. Alex James, who'd gone on to have the military career that Harry had chosen to give up. "Alex? Jesus, how did you find me?" "I saw the news about the incident at your facility. When I read that a security supervisor named Harry Wilson had coordinated the emergency response, I had a feeling it might be you. How many Harry Wilsons could there be who'd know how to take charge in a situation like that? What are you doing these days?" "I'm the Deputy Director of Homeland Security for Critical Infrastructure, and I'm very interested in what happened at your facility today." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Why?" "Because what happened today wasn't an isolated incident. We've been tracking a pattern of attacks on power facilities across the Midwest. Small incidents mostly, but all of them showing the same level of inside knowledge and technical sophistication that you described in your report. My report? The FBI interviewed you this afternoon, remember? Very thorough debriefing about Chen's methods and capabilities. We think he might be part of a larger network. Harry thought about Chen's words in the basement, about industrial accidents and teaching lessons. Alex, are you saying this was coordinated? I'm saying we don't know yet, but we'd like your help finding out. I'm 72 years old. I'm not exactly FBI material. No, but you're something better. You're someone who understands how these facilities work, who can spot things that trained investigators might miss. And you're someone I trust completely. Harry looked around his kitchen at the modest home he'd shared with Margaret for 23 years. Tomorrow morning, he could call Midwest Energy and accept the position as head of security. He could spend the next few years making sure their facility was protected against future attacks. It would be meaningful work, important work. Or he could help Alex James track down the people who thought it was acceptable to put innocent lives at risk to make political points. Alex, what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to come to Washington. Temporary consulting position, 6 months to start. Help us understand how these attackers think, what they're really after, how to stop them before they succeed somewhere else. And if I say no, then I'll respect your decision and leave you alone.
But Harry, I need you to understand something. What you did today saved 30 lives. What you could do for us might save thousands. Harry closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. At 72, he'd thought he was done with that weight. But maybe some people never really retired from the job of protecting others. When do you need an answer? Take your time. But Harry, don't take too long. We think they're planning something bigger. After Alex hung up, Harry sat in his kitchen for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences, and the strange way life had of bringing you full circle when you least expected it. Tomorrow morning, he'd have to decide whether he was ready to take on one more mission, or whether it was finally time to let someone else carry the load. But tonight, he was content to sit in his quiet house and remember what it felt like to be the person people turned to when everything went wrong.
It was a good feeling. It was the feeling of being useful. Outside his window, the lights of his neighborhood shone steady and bright, powered by the facility he'd helped save that afternoon. Somewhere in those houses, families were going about their evening routines, never knowing how close they'd come to losing everything because one man had decided that making a point was more important than protecting lives. But they were safe tonight because another man had decided that protecting lives was the only point that mattered. Harry raised his beer in a silent toast to all the boring security guards and night watchmen and maintenance workers who spent their careers preparing for days they hoped would never come. Today had been his day, and he'd been ready for it. The question now was whether he was ready for whatever came next. The phone rang again at exactly midnight. Harry had been expecting it. Mr. Wilson, this is Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI. Yes, that Chen. David is my brother.
I think we need to talk. And just like that, Harry Wilson realized that his story was far from over. It was just beginning.